Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Earth, where quiet curiosity meets deep question, and wonder is allowed to take its time. Tonight, we won't be speaking of tomorrow's worries or today's headlines. Instead, we'll drift far back, so far that the world feels almost like another planet. A time when giants walked through forests, when seas shimmered with creatures now only found in stone. We know how their story ended, with fire from the sky. But what if that ending wasn't the whole story? What if something, or someone, survived the darkness that followed? Close your eyes for a moment and let your mind drift far, far back through time. Not thousands of years, not even millions, but over 65 million years ago, into a world that feels both alien and strangely familiar. This was the late Cretaceous period, the very last chapter of the dinosaurs' reign. The air was warmer, then heavy with moisture, as if the entire planet had exhaled a long, steady breath. Forests blanketed much of the land, not the forests we know today, but vast expanses of towering conifers, ginkgo trees, and flowering plants just beginning their spread. The ground was alive with ferns and undergrowth, buzzing with insects whose ancestors still hover in our gardens today. If you stood there, still and quiet, you might hear the rustle of cicadas, the calls of strange birds that were not quite birds, and the heavy footfalls of creatures far larger than anything our modern world holds. Imagine the rivers, wide and slow, winding through valleys where herds of hadrosaurs grazed. These were gentle giants with long bills perfect for stripping leaves and crests on their heads that may have echoed with haunting calls. In the swamps, armored ankylosaurs moved like living tanks, their clubbed tails dragging through the mud. And above them, in the open plains, tyrannosaurs, sharp-eyed and patient, waited for their chance. It was a world of abundance, a world in balance. Life had not only adapted to Earth's rhythms, it had flourished into dazzling variety. But here's something to consider. When we picture dinosaurs, we often imagine them as primitive, lumbering, mindless beasts, yet science has slowly peeled away that image. Many dinosaurs were fast, agile, social, and clever. Some cared for their young, built nests, and may have even communicated in ways we are only beginning to guess. The line between animal and something more is not as sharp as we once thought. And if intelligence is not a sudden leap, but a slow climb, could some creatures have already been further along that path than we give them credit for? Take the raptors, smaller than their movie versions, feathered, sharp-eyed, quick. Their brains, relative to their body size, were larger than many other dinosaurs. They hunted in groups, coordinated and problem-solved. If given millions of years more, might they have gone even further? Or the ancestors of birds, agile, tool-capable in the way that modern crows and parrots astonish us with their problem-solving skills? What possibilities might have existed, hidden in the shadows of deep time before the asteroid arrived? The oceans tell a similar story. Beneath the waves swam mosasaurs, vast and powerful, alongside fish that would dwarf our largest sharks. Coral reefs teemed with life, while cephalopods, the relatives of modern octopuses and squids, already showed flashes of intelligence. And if you think about it, intelligence in the sea might be even harder for us to imagine. No cities of stone would be left behind, no fires to mark a presence, no bones that could easily fossilize in shifting sands. If there was experimentation, curiosity, or even culture, it may be lost to us entirely. What makes this world so haunting isn't only its strangeness, but its potential. It was a planet full of opportunities. Dinosaurs had reigned for over 150 million years, far longer than humans have existed. That's an almost incomprehensible stretch of time. Long enough for countless experiments in adaptation. Long enough, perhaps, for paths we can't quite imagine. This is the stage before the catastrophe. A thriving Earth, bursting with possibility, yet fragile in ways its inhabitants could never have understood. The forests hummed with life, predators stalked their prey under the dappled light of ancient suns. The seas rolled endlessly, carrying their secrets. And above it all, in the endless blue of the sky, a visitor was already on its way. A rock, impossibly distant, impossibly fast. The dinosaurs could not have known. How could they? To them, the world seemed permanent, unshakable, eternal. But we, looking back, know what is coming. We know the silence that will follow. And in that knowledge, a question stirs. If this world were so rich, so alive and so ancient, might something have found a way to endure, even through the fire that was about to fall? The world before the cataclysm was vibrant, steady, and alive with possibility. But every story has its turning point, a moment when the balance shifts. For the age of dinosaurs, that moment came from the sky. Picture the Earth as it was, a planet unaware of its own fragility. Then, high above, from the depths of space, a visitor approached, a rock, roughly 10 kilometers across, moving faster than sound could ever travel. It had wandered for millions of years, silent and indifferent, and yet, in a single instant, its path and Earth's path would cross. When it struck the shallow waters of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, the force was beyond anything we can truly imagine. It released more energy than all the nuclear weapons ever built by humankind, combined many times over. Within seconds, the world was transformed. The ground itself shook, waves of fire spread outward, forests igniting like kindling. The very air grew incandescent as debris rained down, heating the skies until they glowed. Animals across the continent, perhaps across the globe, must have looked upward in confusion, in terror, as the heavens themselves seemed to catch fire. But the impact was only the beginning. The real devastation came in the days and months that followed. The rock had struck shallow ocean, throwing vast amounts of vaporized stone, sulfur, and dust into the sky. These fine particles spread around the planet, forming a shroud that dimmed the sun. The Earth grew dark, temperatures plummeted, photosynthesis slowed, then stalled, plants withered. The chains of life, delicate and interwoven, began to collapse. For the great herbivores, the hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, food grew scarce. Without them, the predators too began to fail. The seas, once abundant, grew troubled as plankton. The foundation of ocean life diminished. It was not just a storm, but a long winter, a global silence settling over the Earth. From a distance, this moment looks absolute, final. Textbooks call it the end of the dinosaurs, and in a way it was. Nearly 3/4 of all species on Earth vanished in that narrow window of time. It was, by every measure, one of the greatest extinction events the planet has ever endured. But here is where curiosity slips in. Was it truly the end, or only an ending as we frame it, looking back with limited evidence? Some life endured. We know that because here we are, descendants of small, fragile mammals that found ways to survive. Birds, too, the last living dinosaurs, carried their lineage forward through the darkness. Deep in the seas, creatures shielded from the worst of the cooling carried on. So then, if some life survived, could more have survived than we imagine? Science tells us what is most likely, based on the fragments of evidence we have: bones in stone, chemical traces in rock, patterns etched across the planet's layers. But science also acknowledges what we don't know, and in those spaces of uncertainty, wonder has room to breathe. What if the extinction was not as absolute as we imagine? What if, tucked away in sheltered valleys, in deep caves, or perhaps beneath the sea, pockets of life endured in forms more complex than we have yet considered? When we think of extinction, we often imagine a sudden curtain dropping, a total erasure. But nature is rarely so neat. Even in devastation, survivors are clinging to existence. And survival does not always mean remaining unchanged. Sometimes crisis forces life to adapt, to innovate, to find strange and unexpected paths forward. The asteroid was a catastrophe, yes, but it was also a filter. It chose who continued and who did not. The mammals that crept through the underbrush, the birds that flitted between shadows, the fish that swam deep below, they were not stronger in the way we might think. They were simply lucky, small, or adaptable enough to endure what others could not. Now let us pause on a speculative thought. If intelligence had been slowly kindling before the impact in birds, in raptors, perhaps even in the oceans, could that spark have endured too? Could it have hidden in the same shadows where our mammalian ancestors waited out the darkness? It is a question we cannot answer with certainty. The fossil record is incomplete. Entire worlds may have risen and vanished without leaving a clear trace, and so we are left with both knowledge and mystery. The facts of fire and ice and the wonder of what might have lived unseen. The great cataclysm is remembered as an ending, but in its ashes lay the seeds of beginnings, for mammals, for birds, for us, and perhaps, just perhaps, for others we have not yet discovered. The curtain fell on the dinosaurs, but what or who might have stepped behind that curtain, waiting for a different stage, a different time? When the skies dimmed and the fires cooled, silence spread across much of the earth. The great herds were gone. The towering giants, long-necked sauropods, horned ceratopsians, armored titans, had vanished. Predators that once thundered across the land followed soon after, their prey no longer there to sustain them. And yet, even in silence, the earth was never empty. Life, fragile and persistent, had tucked itself into hidden corners. Small mammals scurried in burrows, feeding on insects, seeds, and roots. They were not mighty or fearsome, but they were adaptable. They could live on less, hide in places the giants never could, and wait patiently through the long cold. These were our ancestors, carrying the quiet ember of survival through the darkness. Birds, too, descendants of the very dinosaurs that seemed to perish, endured. Not all, of course. Many species were lost, but some, perhaps small and inconspicuous, found ways to adapt. Insects still buzzed, seeds are still scattered. In these modest gifts of nature, the birds found enough to cling to life. The seas also whispered with survival. Deep in the oceans, where sunlight barely reached, ecosystems continued almost undisturbed. Creatures of the abyss, shielded by depth and distance, carried on their strange and secretive lives. Tiny plankton populations may have crashed, but in hidden niches, marine species endured. Sharks, coelacanths, turtles, lineages that had seen countless upheavals before, survived once more. It is humbling to realize survival often belongs not to the strong, but to the small, the hidden, the adaptable. But here is where curiosity invites us deeper. If such creatures, small mammals, modest birds, ocean dwellers, could endure, then is it impossible that other, less obvious survivors might also have persisted? We assume the asteroid drew a clear boundary. Before, there were dinosaurs, after, there were not. Yet nature rarely paints in such absolute strokes. Could there have been remnants, pockets of life that carried on in isolation, perhaps in remote valleys, shielded caves, or island refuges? Perhaps not in great numbers, not enough to dominate again, but enough to persist quietly or unseen. And if some dinosaurs survived, not merely as birds, but in other forms we have yet to discover, what then? What if intelligence itself, in some early, unpolished form, had found a way to huddle in those shadows too? Consider the dromaeosaurs, the raptors. Small, clever, with sharp eyes and quick reflexes. They hunted together, perhaps communicated in ways more complex than we can prove. What if, somewhere, some of them endured just long enough to pass their spark a little further forward? Would we even notice their traces today, 66 million years later? Or think of the oceans, where cephalopods already showed flashes of brilliance. Modern octopuses solve puzzles, open jars, and display a kind of intelligence startlingly alien to our own. Their ancestors lived through the cataclysm. Could some branch of that family have ventured further, experimenting with behaviors we would recognize today as almost thoughtful? The difficulty is this: time erases. Fossils are rare. Entire species may have lived and vanished without ever leaving their mark on stone. 66 million years is a vast gulf. In that span, mountains rise and crumble, seas open and close, and continents drift like slow-moving rafts. How much could truly remain of a civilization, or even of a species with the potential for one? This is where we find ourselves suspended between knowledge and mystery. On one side, the science is clear. The asteroid brought devastation, and most large creatures perished. On the other side lies the unknown, the possibility that survival may have taken stranger forms than we expect. What is most fascinating is the pattern. In every great extinction, something unexpected endures. After the Permian extinction, far worse than the one that ended the dinosaurs, life rebounded in ways no one could have predicted. The survivors were not always the obvious ones, so perhaps in the shadows after the fire, Earth held stories we may never fully uncover. Imagine it: small, intelligent beings clinging to existence in a darkened world, their once thriving kind, reduced to scattered remnants forced to adapt quickly or perish. They might have left no monuments, no written words, no great architectures of stone or metal, only fleeting marks. Bones dissolved into sediment, fragile tools worn away, whispers lost in the shifting earth. Did such beings exist? We cannot say, but the very possibility lingers, haunting the silence between the facts. What we do know is that survival is rarely grand. It is quiet, it is hidden, and often it is overlooked until much later, when its descendants rise into the light once more. In the long shadows after the asteroid, mammals, birds, and deep-sea dwellers clung to life. From them, entire new worlds of possibility would eventually unfold, but alongside them perhaps there may have been others, shadows of intelligence that flickered briefly, then faded, leaving behind only questions. And it is those questions, lingering, unanswered, that draw us forward into speculation. If life can endure even after such devastation, then what might have been possible in those long, hidden years? What might have survived not only in body but in mind? When we speak of civilization, we usually mean ourselves: cities, writing, tools of metal and glass, languages spoken and recorded, cultures built layer upon layer. It is easy to imagine that civilization is something uniquely human, a fragile achievement born just once in a brief window of time. But here is a humbling thought: humanity's entire story of civilization, from the first settled villages to the sprawling global networks of today, spans barely 10,000 years, a flicker, a breath in the deep history of life on Earth. Now place that against the reign of the dinosaurs. Not 10,000 years, not even a million, but more than 150 million years of dominance. Entire continents drifted and reshaped themselves during their time. Oceans opened and closed, mountains rose and wore away again. Through it all, dinosaurs thrived, diversified and adapted. If evolution is a slow experiment conducted across unimaginable spans of time, then why do we so quickly assume that intelligence, in its higher, problem-solving form, only bloomed with us? We sometimes comfort ourselves with the idea that intelligence is inevitable, that if life has long enough, it will eventually climb toward awareness. If that is true, then the dinosaurs had more than enough time. Millions upon millions. Would it truly be impossible that at some point some lineage began to experiment with complexity, with tools, with structures, with something resembling culture? The difficulty, of course, lies in the evidence. Civilizations leave marks. But how long do those marks really last? Look around our own world. The tallest skyscrapers, the largest bridges, the most advanced machines, how long would they endure if humans were suddenly gone? Steel rusts, concrete crumbles, glass shatters. Within a few centuries, vines would reclaim our cities. Within tens of thousands of years, little would remain but faint outlines, perhaps recognizable only from above. Within 1,000,000 years, even those outlines would blur. Now stretch that thought. 66 million years. The gulf that separates us from the dinosaurs' end. Whole mountain ranges have risen in less time. Entire seas have opened and swallowed continents. Ice ages have carved and erased valleys. The surface of the earth is restless, a great recycler of memory. If there ever were civilizations before us, whether dinosaurian, avian, or otherwise, their traces could have been swallowed long ago, their buildings ground into dust, their tools dissolved, their bones scattered and transformed into stone. Some scientists have entertained this idea in a more grounded form, calling it the Silurian hypothesis. It asks if an industrial civilization had arisen millions of years before humans, would we be able to detect it? The answer is sobering. After enough time, almost all direct evidence would be erased. Only subtle chemical signatures like unusual patterns of carbon or heavy metals in the rocks might remain, and even those could be masked by natural processes, and so the absence of evidence may not be evidence of absence. Still, skepticism is natural. After all, we have found no clear signs, no fossilized hammers, no imprints of cities. The rocks are silent, but they are also incomplete. Most of life leaves no fossils at all. The Earth is vast, and the record we hold is scattered, partial, and fragmentary. This is where contrast sharpens the question. On the one hand, we have the clarity of science. The impact was devastating, and life afterward looked very different. On the other hand, we have the immensity of time, long enough for entire civilizations to rise and fall without leaving a clear trace. Between these poles lies the space of wonder. Imagine for a moment a species of clever raptors, small, agile, social hunters. Over millions of years, they grow more intelligent, perhaps learning to use stones as tools, to coordinate in ways beyond instinct. Perhaps they develop fire or primitive shelters, maybe not skyscrapers, not satellites, but something that, in its own way, was civilization, or picture avian beings, ancestors of birds, experimenting with nests not only as shelters, but as villages. Communal, organized, passing knowledge between generations. Over countless centuries, those villages might grow into something more structured, something we might one day call culture. And if they did, what became of them? Did the asteroid erase not only their bodies, but also their memory? Did their fragile achievements vanish in the smoke and ash, leaving only whispers we can never recover? Speculation invites another possibility, that some may have survived, carried forward in small, hidden groups. Their numbers dwindled, their world reshaped, until eventually they too disappeared, leaving no visible mark. A story half-written, torn away before it could be read. It is tempting, of course, to imagine them as mirrors of ourselves, building cities, writing language, leaving monuments. But perhaps that is too narrow. If other civilizations did exist, they may not have looked anything like ours. Their tools may not have been metal, but bone or shell. Their architecture may not have been stone, but living plants shaped into forms. Their traces, already fragile, would dissolve quickly into the earth. This is what makes the possibility both haunting and gentle. The thought that entire worlds may have blossomed and vanished, unnoticed long before ours began, even if no such civilizations ever existed. The question itself changes how we see our place in time. It reminds us that Earth's story is long, far longer than ours, and that intelligence, even civilization, may not be unique, but simply one of many experiments scattered across the eons. And perhaps the most profound lesson is this: if we were gone tomorrow, What would remain of us in 66 million years? Would another intelligence one day ask the same question, wondering if we had ever been here at all? The dinosaurs' world was vast, their time was long, and though we cannot yet prove that civilizations bloomed among them, we cannot entirely dismiss the possibility either. Between science and silence lies a wide space, and in that space, imagination walks softly. When we think of civilization, we often imagine permanence. Cities feel solid beneath our feet. Towers of glass and steel seem unshakable. Bridges, dams, monuments all feel as though they were built to last. Yet in truth, civilization is a delicate layer, a thin film upon the surface of the earth. Time, given patience, can wash it all away. Consider this. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, how long would our world remain recognizable? In the first year, the lights would go out. Power plants would fail without humans to maintain them. Within a few decades, forests would reclaim roads and buildings. Concrete would crack under roots. Glass would shatter. Metal would corrode. Our cities, so mighty in appearance, would begin to crumble. Within a few thousand years, less than a blink in geological terms, most of our structures would collapse into rubble. The tallest skyscrapers would be little more than mounds of rust and stone. Great dams might linger as broken walls, rivers eventually carving their way through again. In 10,000 years, perhaps a few fragments would remain. Stone monuments, like the pyramids, or carved rock like Mount Rushmore, might endure in weathered form, but the majority of our material world would be gone. In 1 million years, even those traces would fade. Erosion, landslides, floods, and tectonic shifts would erase the last outlines. Our artifacts, if buried, might fossilize in rare conditions, but scattered, broken, and incomplete. In 10 million years, any evidence of us would be so deeply buried or transformed that it might be almost impossible to detect. And in 66 million years, the span between us and the dinosaurs fall, almost nothing would remain. A few unusual chemical signatures in rock, traces of plastics, radioactive isotopes, heavy metals, might whisper that we were here, but those whispers would be faint, difficult to distinguish from natural processes. Our cities, our machines, our art, our voices, gone. Now turn this thought around. If we were to vanish so thoroughly, why should we expect more from a hypothetical civilization that lived tens of millions of years ago? If they existed, their traces may have long since been erased. This is the sobering truth of geology. The Earth recycles itself. Oceans close and open, continents drift and collide, mountains rise only to be worn down to dust, sediments bury and compress, becoming stone, volcanoes erupt, reshaping the land. Over millions of years, entire landscapes are swallowed and remade. The base fossil record itself reflects this fragility. Only a tiny fraction of living things ever become fossils. Most are consumed, dissolved, or scattered before they can be preserved, and even fossils that do form are vulnerable, crushed by shifting. Rock melted by magma or eroded back into the wind. Our knowledge of ancient life is therefore fragmentary, a patchwork of glimpses. Think of how many species may have come and gone without ever leaving a trace we can find. Entire lineages might have flourished for millions of years, only to vanish into silence. We see only what chance has preserved. So if an intelligent species, even a civilization, did exist before us, how confident can we be that the Earth would have kept its memories safe? Let's imagine one. Suppose a species of feathered dinosaurs, clever and social, developed rudimentary tools. They learned to use fire to shape shelters, perhaps even to carve symbols. Their cities might have been wood and bone, built in river valleys or coastal plains. Over time, their numbers grew, their culture deepened. They thrived for thousands of years. Then the asteroid came, fire, darkness, collapse. Their fragile achievements burned, crumbled, or were buried. Within centuries, little remained. Within millennia, nothing. Within millions of years, even the last trace would be gone. Is this so different from what would happen to us if someone were to look back 66 million years from now? This is where the contrast sharpens. We see our world as permanent, but the Earth's patience is greater. To the planet, even civilizations are temporary guests, and yet there may be subtle clues. Not monuments, not fossils, but signals in the chemistry of rocks. If a species burned fuels, mined metals, or altered ecosystems on a large scale, those changes might leave traces. A sudden spike in carbon, an unusual deposit of rare elements, patterns that don't quite match the natural rhythm of Earth. Some scientists have even looked for such signatures, not to prove ancient civilizations on Earth, but to test the limits of detection itself. They ask, if we, humans, were gone, what evidence would remain for future geologists to find? Their answers are unsettling. Beyond a few chemical oddities, not much at all, which brings us back to the possibility of forgotten civilizations. If their traces were fragile, their time distant, their memory erased, how would we know? The silence of the rocks does not prove they never existed. It only proves that if they did, time has hidden them well. This idea is not meant to be a claim, but an opening. A gentle reminder that what we know is always smaller than what has been. The Earth has lived more lives than we can count, and most of them are lost. Civilization, then, is not guaranteed permanence. It is fragile, fleeting, and perhaps far less unique than we imagine. If others came before, they may have been erased. If others come after, we too may be erased. And yet, within this fragility lies a strange comfort. Our story is part of a much larger tapestry woven across ages. Whether or not there were forgotten civilizations, the question itself invites humility. It reminds us that we are temporary, but not alone, part of a planet that has seen many wonders, many rises and falls, many beginnings and endings. The evidence may be lost. The questions may linger, but the wonder, the possibility, remains. The asteroid's arrival was devastating. Skies burned, darkness fell, ecosystems collapsed. For most creatures, there was no escape. But what if, among the ruins of that ancient world, a few did endure? It is one thing to imagine survival in bun caves or in the deep ocean. As we know, some mammals, birds, and marine creatures managed to survive. But it is another to wonder whether something more sophisticated, something resembling a civilization, could have found a way through the catastrophe. If intelligence existed before the impact, perhaps it also came with foresight, and foresight, however limited, might have opened doors to survival strategies beyond instinct. One possibility lies underground. Caves and tunnels shield against extremes of temperature, protect from firestorms, and provide safe storage for food. Even today, species that dwell in darkness, bats, rodents, reptiles, show how resilient underground life can be. If an intelligent species had learned to use caves not only as dwellings but as sanctuaries, they might have bought themselves precious time. Another possibility lies in the sea. The oceans are vast refuges buffering against surface changes. Deep waters would not have felt the same temperature shocks as the air. Life there endured the impact far better than on land. If an intelligent lineage had lived along coasts, building shelters in reefs or kelp forests, they might have shifted to deeper waters during the worst years. Their memory of the surface may have faded, but their survival would have continued. And then there is the most daring speculation. What if such beings had reached toward the stars? Not in rockets of metal, but perhaps in smaller steps. Floating stations, early vessels, even a primitive mastery of flight or gliding habitats. If they had lifted themselves into orbit, or simply beyond the worst zones of impact, might a handful have waited for the Earth to heal? It sounds fantastical. Yet when we place it against the scale of time, is it truly impossible? After all, in less than 10,000 years of agriculture, humans built spacecraft. Dinosaurs had millions upon millions of years in which parallel experiments might have unfolded. Of course, survival would not have been easy. Food chains collapsed. Temperatures swung wildly. Ash and dust dimmed the sun for years. Any intelligent survivors would have needed remarkable adaptability and perhaps a willingness to abandon the world they knew. We might picture them huddled in networks of caves, rationing stored food, waiting for the skies to clear, or hidden in the ocean depths, adapting to a darker, quieter existence, or perhaps leaving altogether, their trail vanishing into the stars. And here a contrast emerges. On one hand, the scientific view. Survival required small size, flexibility, and luck, qualities that favored mammals and birds, not advanced civilization. On the other hand, the speculative view. Intelligence might itself be the greatest tool of survival, allowing beings to prepare, adapt, and endure in ways others could not. It raises a quiet, haunting question. If they survived, what became of them afterward? Perhaps they lingered for a time, diminished, their numbers too small to sustain a lasting culture. Perhaps they clung on for generations, then gradually faded, leaving no trace. Or perhaps they adapted, transforming into new forms, so changed that we would not recognize their descendants today. And in a wilder thought, perhaps they did not vanish at all. Perhaps they retreated into places we rarely look, the deep sea, the dense jungles, the hidden corners of Earth, or they departed entirely, leaving behind only silence, watching us now from a distance we cannot measure. The asteroid was a great filter, stripping away the unprepared. Yet filters do not always remove everything. They let a few pass through, changed, scarred, but alive. If there was once a civilization before us, then the question of survival lingers like an echo. Did they truly perish, or did some find a way to slip quietly past the catastrophe into the shadows of time? We cannot know for certain. The rocks tell us part of the story, but never the whole. What remains is the space between fact and imagination, or a space where wonder resides, because survival, after all, is not always about strength. Sometimes it belongs to the quiet, the hidden, the patient, and perhaps even the wise, if we allow ourselves, just for a while, to imagine that some ancient beings survived the asteroid impact. What shape might their intelligence have taken? It's tempting to picture them like us, toolmakers with clever hands, cities, and symbols, but intelligence does not always wear the same mask. On Earth, even today, we see astonishing minds in very different forms. The problem-solving octopus, the social elephant, the song-sharing whale. Their ways of knowing the world are not ours, yet they are no less real. So let us drift calmly into the speculative space where an ancient intelligence might unfold. If these beings descended from dinosaurs, their bodies might have reflected that heritage. Perhaps bipedal, balancing on strong hind legs with forelimbs adapted for grasping or delicate manipulation. Feathers, scales, or something in between might have covered them, shimmering with color to signal mood or rank. Their senses could have been sharper than ours. Dinosaurs often had extraordinary vision. Some could see into ranges of light invisible to humans. Imagine a civilization that painted not only with pigments, but with shifting patterns of ultraviolet glow. Their communication might have been as much visual as verbal, a dance of light and shade carried on their very skin. Hearing, too, may have been acute. Certain dinosaurs had inner ear structures suited for low-frequency sounds, the kind that travel long distances through the ground. Perhaps these beings spoke in rumbles as well as calls, their conversations resonating through earth and stone. To us, their language might have been imperceptible, half felt in the bones rather than heard by the ears. But what about thought itself? Human intelligence is bound to our needs: survival, cooperation, curiosity, storytelling. An ancient intelligence might have followed other paths. If they were predators, perhaps their thinking was highly strategic, focused on patience, ambush, and reading the movements of others. If they were herd dwellers, their cognition might have been deeply social, built on bonds of trust and memory, woven into a collective sense of self. Some paleontologists have speculated about dinosaurian mammals, creatures that might have filled ecological roles similar to ours. What if, instead of hands, these beings used beaks or tails, or even vocal cords, to shape their world? A civilization might not need chisels and hammers if its members could sculpt with song, etching patterns into memory and air instead of stone. Theirs may not have been a technological intelligence, but an ecological one, a way of weaving life, together guiding forests, rivers, and prey into patterns that sustained them. In this view, their greatest cities might have been living groves of trees cultivated into forms, reefs sculpted by generations of care. If language defines thought, what would theirs have sounded like? Human speech relies on air and vibration. But what if they used color shifts, feather displays, or changes in body temperature as part of their expression? To us, it might look like art. To them, it was a conversation, or perhaps their language was slow. Some species today, whales for instance, share songs that last hours, with subtle variations passed through generations. An ancient intelligence might have spoken in epics, where a single sentence stretched across a season. Their culture would move at a pace too gentle for us to grasp, but rich with depth. We often equate intelligence with tools, spears, wheels, engines, computers. But intelligence may not always leave behind machines. Perhaps these beings never built in stone, never forged metal. Instead, they lived in balance with the natural world, altering it, subtly but profoundly. They could have directed the growth of plants, domesticated insects, or guided migration paths. Their technology might have been ecological choreography, a quiet shaping of life itself. Such achievements would leave little trace. A forest, guided by their hand, would look millions of years later like any other forest. Their intelligence would vanish into the soil. Here, the contrast grows clear. We define civilization by permanence, by things that can be measured and weighed. But another intelligence may have defined success as harmony, its greatest monuments living, breathing, and ephemeral. If that were the case, then we are asking the wrong question when we search for ruin. We are looking for stone when the evidence might have always been alive. A daring thought lingers. If such an intelligence survived by choosing harmony over conquest, might it have never perished? Perhaps it did not need to dominate the earth as we have. Perhaps it learned to remain hidden, blending into ecosystems that we overlook. There are legends in every culture of beings older than humanity. Dragons, serpent kings, watchers beneath the sea. Could such stories echo from a time when another intelligence walked the earth alongside us, not in steel towers, but in forests, quietly thriving until memory forgot them? It is speculation, yes, but it is also humility. Intelligence does not always look like us. If there was once another, its face, its mind, its language may have been so different that we would not even recognize it as kin, the shape of an ancient. Intelligence, then, is not a fixed image but a question. How many ways can minds exist? We know only one, our own, but the earth has been here far longer than us. It may have already hosted others who thought, who dreamed, who found meaning in patterns of light or song, and who vanished without leaving their name. And perhaps as we listen to the hush of the night, we can imagine them not as rivals, but as reminders. Reminders that intelligence is not the sole property of humanity, nor is it bound to our form. It is a possibility, a flame that can ignite in many shapes and flicker away without a trace. The earth may have seen such flames before. It may see them again. If in some hidden corner of Earth's past a civilization truly rose and fell long before us, what would that mean for humanity today? At first glance, the thought is thrilling. almost fantastical. It would mean we are not the first to walk this path of intelligence, not the only minds to wonder at the stars or shape the world to their will. But beneath the thrill, there is a deeper resonance, one that touches on humility, mortality, and the fragile thread that binds all civilizations together. We humans often imagine ourselves as unique, the singular intelligence of the planet, the only beings to dream in mathematics, art, and story. But if another civilization had already walked this road, that uniqueness fades. We would be one chapter in a longer book, not the sole authors of Earth's intelligence. This humbling does not diminish us, it expands us. It reminds us that intelligence is not an accident tied only to our species. It may be a recurring possibility, a spark that can ignite again and again in different form. And if it has happened before, it may happen again, perhaps after us in some distant future, when our own traces have long vanished. But the thought also unsettled. If they were here and are now gone, then civilization itself is not as enduring as we might hope. It suggests that culture, knowledge, and achievement can vanish completely, leaving almost no trace. The skyscrapers we build, the digital worlds we weave, the songs and stories we cherish, all of it could be erased, just as theirs might have been. Civilization, then, is less like stone and more like a candle flame. It flickers brightly, but only for a time. And the wind of catastrophe, whether asteroid, climate, or our own choices, can snuff it out with startling ease. This perspective invites us to hold our achievements with gratitude, not arrogance, to see them not as permanent monuments, but as fragile gifts entrusted to us for a while. If there were another civilization, what lesson would their disappearance hold? Perhaps that survival demands resilience, not just brilliance. The measure of intelligence is not only what it creates, but how well it endures. We might learn that technology alone is not enough if it is not guided by balance with the earth, or that foresight, while powerful, must be matched with humility before forces larger than ourselves. In a quiet way, imagining them becomes a mirror, showing us the paths we might take, the dangers we might face, and the importance of preparing not only for tomorrow, but for centuries yet to come. There is also comfort in the thought. If others came before, then our story is not isolated. It belongs to a lineage of intelligence on this planet, a shared experiment across time. Their voices may be lost, but their existence, even if only imagined, connects us to something larger. We are part of Earth's long, unfolding tale of awareness. We walk not on virgin ground, but on the layered soil of stories that came before. This continuity softens the fear of impermanence. If we are not the first, then perhaps it does not matter if we are not the last. Each civilization is a wave, rising and falling, yet all part of the same ocean. And yet the greatest lesson may lie in the uncertainty itself. We do not know if they existed. We may never know. The rocks remain silent. The myths remain ambiguous. The evidence may be lost forever. But it is in that not knowing that curiosity lives. The possibility keeps us open, keeps us humble, keeps us questioning. It invites us to wonder not only about the past, but about the future, about what kinds of intelligence may yet arise here or elsewhere in the cosmos. Not knowing is not a failure. It is the very thing that makes the question worth asking. So, what would it mean for us if there was once a civilization before us? It would mean humility. We are not the only ones. It would mean fragility. All things pass. And it would mean continuity. Intelligence is not an exception, but a rhythm in the song of Earth. Whether or not it is true, the possibility itself carries meaning. It reminds us that our time here is precious, our story delicate, our place within the vast history of the planet, both small and wondrous, and perhaps that is enough. Not to prove, not to claim, but to remember we are part of a world that has seen many beginnings and endings. If others came before, then our story is shared. If not, then we are the first flame, and we carry the responsibility to burn with care. And so we arrive at the end of our journey. We have drifted across vast stretches of time, from the age of the dinosaurs to the quiet of tonight. We have imagined cataclysms, survivors, forgotten civilizations, and myths that might carry shadows of memory. We have asked what it would mean for us if we were not the first to wonder at the stars. But now, as the questions soften, what remains is not proof or certainty. What remains is wonder. Civilization, we have seen, is not as permanent as it appears. Like a flame, it flickers bright and fragile against the winds of time. Even ours, with all its towers and satellites, may one day vanish, leaving only a whisper in the stone. But fragility does not make the flame less beautiful. If anything, it makes it more precious. To know that our story, like all stories, is temporary is to hold it more tenderly, to treat our world and each other with care. Perhaps others came before, perhaps not. But the thought itself weaves us into a larger tapestry. Intelligence may not be a singular event, but a rhythm, rising, falling, and rising again across ages. If others walk this path before us, then we are part of their story, carrying forward a light that once burned in different hands, in different forms, and if we are the first, then we are the beginning, the first verse in a song that may echo long after we are gone. Either way, we are not alone. We are part of Earth's long unfolding dream. It is tempting to demand answers. Did such a civilization exist? Can we prove it? But sometimes the not knowing is the gift, for it is in uncertainty that imagination lives. In the silence of the rocks, we hear our own questions more clearly. And in the spaces where history is quiet, we are free to wonder, to dream, to tell stories that connect us to the vastness of time. So tonight, as you rest, let these thoughts settle softly. The Earth is ancient, older than we can truly grasp. It has seen worlds rise and fall, creatures flourish and vanish, oceans open and close. Against that backdrop, our story is both small and wondrous. Perhaps others came before, perhaps others will come after. But here, in this moment, it is our turn to carry the flame, to live, to dream, to imagine. And as you drift towards sleep, let that thought be a comfort, that we are part of something vast, mysterious, and beautiful. That even if civilizations are fragile, the wonder they create is never truly lost. It lingers in myths, in questions, and in the quiet curiosity that carries us through the night. Good night.